know, after the Romans destroyed the city of Jerusalem, they would have destroyed all the vegetation for a couple miles around the city, just to really stamp out whoever it is they just destroyed. And so probably all the trees on the Mount of Olives would have been destroyed. Okay. Judas is the one who betrayed Jesus, and he does it in the Garden of Gethsemane after Jesus has his agony in the garden. Okay, so Jesus then is taken to the religious leaders to be tried. Okay, so he's taken to whose house? The house of Caiaphas. Okay. Again, I told you, like, these red roofs were the roofs of the priests. So the house of Caiaphas is in that area there. He was the high priest for that year. So it was in one of these buildings. And you can go there. There's a church called Peter and Gallicantu, which is a church over a house. And outside in the courtyard, they have this image. What do you think is going on in that sculpture there? What do you think this might be? Peter. And who would that be?
Yeah, servant girl.
The servant girl saying, hey, don't you know Jesus? Like, I don't know him. I don't know him. Inside the church, or like if you look through these glass doors, inside there is this image of Jesus all bound up, looking to his Father. Okay? So, inside, again, it's a church, over a house, that in the basement of the house were 2 cisterns. So a cistern is different than a well. A well, you tap into a water source and then you pull the water out. A cistern collects water from rain, and that's the water that you use from the cistern. So the thought is that maybe overnight they held Jesus in these cisterns. And so you can go down there and pray, and it's a pretty powerful, another pretty powerful place to think about Jesus and what he was thinking about that night. Okay, the next day is Good Friday. So on Good Friday, it's the only day of the year where we don't have a Mass. Because the Triduum is one continuous liturgy. You will notice there's a sign of the cross at the beginning of Holy Thursday, and there's a sign of the cross at the end of Holy Saturday, because it's one continuous liturgy. So on Good Friday, we do receive the Eucharist, but you're going to notice that the tabernacle is actually empty. It's empty from the end of Holy Thursday liturgy until during Holy Saturday Mass, during the Holy Saturday liturgy, which is a Mass. We bring the Blessed Sacrament out from the sacristy out during communion. So anyway, on Good Friday, there's a reading of the Passion narrative. There is prayers for the church, and part of it, again, at the beginning, the presider lays face down on the ground, prostrates himself. Okay, so what happens for Jesus at that point? So Jesus is taken from the house of Caiaphas back to the temple, because that's probably where the Sanhedrin would meet. And so he's taken before the religious leaders to be judged. This here is the temple. And that red-roofed area is called the Roman Stoa. And it's under there that they believe that that's where the Sanhedrin would have met. Okay? They condemn him. Yes?
This is off subject, but on that last slide, where's the Wailing Wall at?
Yep, sure. So the Wailing Wall, again, this area here is a built-up wall just to create a level plane. And then that wall went perpendicular back into the ground. That wall is still there. even though the whole temple was destroyed by the Romans, okay? Every block of the temple was pushed off the Temple Mount. When the Jews go to pray now, they go to this wall here, the one that's perpendicular to us. It's the western wall, or the wailing wall, because they're wailing, they're crying that God will answer their prayers and rebuild the temple. He'll send somebody to rebuild the temple. And that's where they do it right now. Okay, so Jesus is then sent to Pilate. And he's sent up here to Antonio's fortress, or the Praetorium. All right? So this would have been the royal porch, the Roman Stoa. They would have sent him out, and they would have walked him around and taken him there. Okay? So this is perhaps what that fortress looked like, and it was right next to the temple. So it's right there. And the reason it is located there is because the Romans could put soldiers up on the parapets to look down into the temple, because during the feast like the Passover, there would be hundreds of thousands of people in here, possibly. And they were nervous that when they got all those Jews together, they were going to revolt, have some sort of revolution. So they wanted to have eyes on the lookout in case things started to get hairy, so that they could send Roman soldiers in there to quell anything. Okay, underneath where that Praetorium was, there is still a 1st century road. And you can touch it like I am there. And it's believed that Jesus walked along that. So that's pretty crazy that you can touch the ground that Jesus might have walked across. Okay, Pilate sends Jesus to Herod. Herod is he doesn't really have any power at this point. Pilate had to come in and take over from the Romans because Herod was a klutz in terms of a leader. But he still had his palace and everything. So his palace would have been over here, right there in Jerusalem. And so this is what they think, perhaps what it looked like. Something like this whole thing, which would have housed hundreds of people so that he could have parties and everything. So he's taken to Herod. Herod wants him to do a miracle. He won't do it, and so he just sends him back. He's not even going to deal with it. So he goes back to the Praetorium, back to the Antonio's palace, fortress, and then he is condemned and sent on his way to be crucified. So he walks through the streets of Jerusalem, making his way to go out the gate. Again, this would have been the outer wall at the time of Jesus. Go out of the gate because everybody would have been crucified outside of the gates, okay, outside of the city. And you can walk along that Via Dolorosa, the way of sorrow, and there are different little chapels or spots where the Stations of the Cross would happen. And so Jesus is crucified somewhere out in this area, or would have been like up in through there. Okay. Golgotha is in this area right in through here, and if you do the Stations of the Cross, you know that the 10th station is where Jesus is stripped. The 11th station, he is nailed to the cross. 12th station is where he dies. So there are 2 chapels inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. That was the answer to one of those questions. The right chapel is where he's nailed to the cross. And then the left chapel has this altar. And then underneath it, you can see there's a person there. There's 2 feet there. And they are looking through a hole, reaching down through a hole and touching the top. And it's really hard to see in this picture, but this is actually glass, and this is rock inside the glass, because this is the top of Golgotha. And so you reach down to touch it because it was somewhere in through here that Jesus' cross would have been placed. So Jesus dies, he's buried, and then we have Holy Saturday, which is when we contemplate Jesus' burial. It's during Holy Saturday when Jesus is buried, before he rises from the dead, where we're told that he descends into the realm of the dead in order to preach the gospel to those who had died, with the hope that they would embrace the gospel and that he would then give them salvation. So Holy Saturday begins with the whole church being dark and the light of Christ is brought in. We're going to light it outside, and then we've got an Easter candle that we just got the other day that we're going to light, bring it into the church, and then everybody's going to light their candles. And it's really, really cool to just watch how this dark church suddenly just slowly fills with light. And then we sing a hymn to the deacon will sing the Exultet, which is a hymn to the candle. Okay, so the Holy Sepulchre, again, is the church that's over both the spot where Jesus was crucified and the spot where he was buried, because Golgotha is right next to the garden that had the tombs, one of which was used for Jesus. So Jesus is in the tomb on Holy Saturday. Again, it's in that same area up there. And the tomb, so this is a chapel inside of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and it's inside that chapel where there's an altar. This is the altar, and it's believed that that is, underneath that altar is where Jesus' body was laid. And so one night when I was there, they lock the Church of the Holy Sepulchre overnight. But you can be locked in if you're kind of sponsored by one of the 8 different Catholic or Orthodox or Catholic groups that help to run it. And so I got locked in from 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. on a Saturday night, and at 11 p.m. they come in and do night prayer. But during that time, I had about a half an hour by myself inside that chapel to pray at the spot where Jesus rose from the dead. The most important thing to ever happen in the history of all humanity happened right there. Okay, and then of course we have Easter morning, where we celebrate Jesus' resurrection. So, we talked about the Wailing Wall, so this is what it looks like today. Okay, so they all stand at the base of the wall, and they pray the Psalms, and they ask the Lord to rebuild the temple. And there are cracks in between or joints in between the stone, and you'll see little pieces of paper shoved in there. They're prayers from people that they stick in there, because it's like the closest they can get to the holiest spot that ever was for the Jews, and they're hoping that God will hear their prayers. Okay, so let's go through the answers to the questions. First Holy Week was in Jerusalem, which is in Israel, which is in Asia. He rode into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. He went across the Kidron Valley. The oil of salvation, or the oil of the catechumens, the oil of the sick, and the chrism oil are what are blessed at the chrism mass. The bishop adds balsam to chrism. The 4 sacraments that use those oils are baptism, confirmation, holy orders, and anointing of the sick. Priests renew their commitments during the chrism mass, and those promises are to chastity, prayer, and obedience. The sacraments that were instituted in the upper room are holy orders in the Eucharist. When would penance and confirmation have been instituted? When would penance have been instituted? We talked about it when I talked about penance.
Forget it.
Yeah, it's okay. I forget too. So it was the night of the resurrection. Jesus comes and he says, "Peace be with you." And then he says, "Whose sins you forgive are forgiven, whose sins you retain are retained." Okay, that's the sacrament of penance. And then confirmation happens on Pentecost, 50 days after the resurrection. Okay. Holy Week questions. Which sacraments were instituted on Holy Thursday? Holy orders in the Eucharist. Who betrayed Jesus? Judas Iscariot. Where did he betray them? Betray him. Garden of Gethsemane, on the Mount of Olives. Who was the high priest during the year Jesus is killed? Caiaphas. Which Holy Week liturgy begins with the priest lying face down on the ground? Good Friday. Which Roman leader condemned him? Pontius Pilate. Where did he do it? Praetorium or Antonio's fortress? On what day do catechumens and candidates receive the sacraments of initiation? Holy Saturday, Easter Vigil. And then what's the name of the church? Holy Sepulchre. And if we need the tiebreaker, he started as bishop, archbishop, on the 15th of January of 2005. Okay, so I want you to go through your answers. And again, if there are multiple questions, multiple answers within one question, each of those gets a point. I want you to figure up how many points you got.
You see the first slide, this one.
Well, we did do so well. We should, right?
Was that the number at the top there?
Or,
19.
let's see, then there's this one.
You've been through this presentation before.
There's three.
Then you get a point for each.
Oh,
There was number
So like there were 3. I'm glad you
It's in
answered.
the,
So you
So-
get 1, 2,
okay, so everybody got their number tallied?
6, 7, 8. Oh, I'm just counting the points. You count them.
That's on the first page.
Who needs a calculator
It's
or an actuarial to help
apparently we
them?
don't need a calculator.
Yes, Jim?
Which oil, or you mentioned that there was oils used on altars. What,
Chrism would be the one to bless an altar.
9,
Yeah.
10,
Okay, we got the number?
13, 14.
Not very good.
Okay, so who got at least 5?
Maybe.
Okay,
Questionable.
who got 10? Who got 12 or more? 14 or more? 16 or more? 18? 20? What did you get?
20.
20? And Bruce?
22.
22, okay. So that's the non-Catholic, Catholic winners, okay? So,
Yay, good job.
Caitlin, you get a Chipotle gift card,
Wow.
$25.
Wow. Wait, let's recount those.
Bruce, you get a protein bar. That is expired. Before we take our break, any questions?
Are only Jews allowed at the Wailing Wall?
No,
Okay, anyone can go.
anyone can go, but women will have to wear a covering, and men have to wear a yarmulke.
Okay.
Other questions?
Do you still have your Yama?
I have a yarmulke, yeah. I don't know if it was the one that I wore there, but I do have one. So, give them a break?
Yep.
Till
5 minutes.